when I was at business school and I was struggling between, not struggling, but like I was debating, should I join McKinsey or should I try and build a startup with my friend?
Right.
Again, I reached out to one of my professors at business school to basically ask him this advice that, hey, should I join McKinsey or should I start up? That was the framing.
Right.
And his answer was brilliant. Like, if you're asking me this question, you should join McKinsey, because like, because starting a company is not like, it's not, it's more emotional
Right.
than just evaluating pros and cons of two
Hmm.
options that you have. The answer needs to be fairly obvious. And when I was in that place 2 years later, I really appreciated that feedback at that point.
Hey Amrit, thanks for agreeing to do this. Really look forward to the conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. We started with this question recently over our podcast, so let's just get into it. What's one truth that you believe in, which very few people agree with you on?
Yeah, I mean, it's always evolving. But I think 4 years back, when I moved back from the US to India, it was not very popular. But at that time, I felt that there was high conviction, and the next decade really is belongs to India, and I would really encourage, if anyone is on the fence, people who live outside India and are exploring a career here. Uh, I think there is a lot of opportunity to do that, and it's increasing every year. That's a very specific one, and then another one is, I really think it's possible to maximize luck by just increasing surface area. We luck by definition, yeah, it's random. Like, you can get randomly lucky, but you can also get lucky just by doing a lot of things over a period of time. So you just put yourself in more and more situations that, yeah, you're not able to connect the dot linearly, that how did this outcome happen, but you do enough work that you still feel that, yeah, I got lucky over a long enough period of time. But it's possible to do that intentionally and not just be random about it.
Surface area expansion of opportunities. That's super interesting. I think the India opportunity, I definitely agree with you. In fact, I think at the time when you made the call, it was very non-obvious. Today, maybe you can argue for it a bit better. It's always better
Yeah.
in the future. But I'm sure that it's fairly non-trivial, and I think for a lot of people in the US and the West, it's still not true. So that's absolutely right. I think we are also very big believers in that. And Amrit, we'd love to explore your early days, especially if you can talk about the journey to becoming a founder, which is not just a business decision, which it seems like for a lot of people, but also a very, very personal decision. And given your background, you've worked at top tier firms, you've gone to amazing educational institutes. There's always the path which is more set and settled to have a career at a consulting firm and just making partner over time. What was the trigger, and if you can talk us through that journey, especially like the thinking and the drama that would have played out in your head in some sense.
Yeah, I remember, like, it was not an easy decision at all. You're right. Like, before this, I was at McKinsey, and before that, did my MBA and started my career at ITC. I went to IIT Madras. So I've had the fortune and privilege of, being in all these good places with nice pedigree and stuff like that. And but they were all very kind of non-controversial decisions.
Right.
Like, when I got into IIT, yeah, I mean, I'll go for it. And then
Yeah.
when I got into McKinsey, ITC, yeah, I mean, they just seemed very good decisions. So there was not much trade-off that one had to make. And I think when I started up was probably one of the first times where I had to really, like, pause and say, okay, is this something I really want to do, or do I go ahead in the path that life has set for me, right? So I think it comes back to that whole maximizing luck through intention. Like, I firmly believe in that. Like, there was a little bit of non-linearity. Like, I was in the US, and I didn't initially get the H1B, so I moved within McKinsey to Australia, and then I finished 6 months in Australia, and then I had the chance to say, okay, maybe I can go to Europe or somewhere else, and then eventually move back to the US. But that was a nice inflection point. Like, it gave us time to think that, oh, is this what we want to do? Suddenly, like, a McKinsey looked like not a 2-year decision, but a 5-year decision. You become, yeah, to your point, is a natural track to become a partner or what have you. And that didn't feel right at that point in my kind of yeah, where I was, both personally and professionally. My wife actually helped a lot in that thinking process. That it just comes down to asking that simple question, like, are we okay with just going with the flow, or really stepping back and just asking ourselves, is this ideally the outcome we want? And when you start thinking the second way, a lot of second order, third order questions come up. One was, oh, we are, our parents, both my wife and my parents are in India. So long term, do we want to be in India? Do we want to be abroad? Where do we want to build a career? Um, and for me, those two were different decisions. The decision to move back to India was independent of the decision to start up.
Understand.
And
Which is
and
a decision in itself, which is, I think, not, I mean, it's controversial, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, and I've spoken to a lot of folks over the last 4 years who are thinking about this. They want to come back to India, and you try and mix the personal and professional. Like, oh, if I come back to India, what will I do? And at some point, you have to believe in yourself that, yeah, if you come back to India, you will probably have a good career, just probabilistically, maybe a better career than you have in the US. But for me, I really treated those as two separate decisions. So I started thinking about starting up after, just when I knew that I was coming back. I spoke to my co-founder Srinath, December 2017, January 2018, around that time frame. But we really got into what we're doing at Zetwerk a couple of months later only, and by that time I was already back in India. Um, but being back in India, talking to lots of people, again, it increased the odds that something like this would happen. Yeah.
And you made a very interesting point. I'd actually not thought in that direction. The trade-offs, right? Now, there's a very interesting implicit trade-off that we've done, but we don't articulate it. And when you said it was a good decision, it actually is a socially acceptable decision.
Mhm. Yeah.
It may not be a good decision taking all the trade-offs, and you trade off something that is individual to you for society in some sense. Did that realization happen to you that, what am I trading off actually? Because a McKinsey job is socially acceptable, but perhaps individually not the best decision for me.
Yeah.
So
No, I mean, it was exactly the case with me. Like, I actually interned at McKinsey before I joined, so I had a
right,
decent preview of how life would be like. And I really liked my time at McKinsey, but I left after a year,
right,
mostly because like, I felt for me the learning curve was very fast during my internship, and maybe the first 3 months of my, like, short McKinsey career, and then kind of slowed down a little bit, to the point where before joining McKinsey, I was almost contemplating not to join.
I see.
Before I started Zetwerk, me and one of my friends from business school, we were playing around with a bunch of ideas in the US, trying to see if some of them could work out into an entrepreneurial endeavor. But then practical stuff took over. Like, I needed a job to stay in the US at that point in time,
Right,
and yeah, McKinsey, to your point, was a great decision. Like, my father was super happy when I got
right,
into McKinsey,
right.
and to the point when I said I'm going to leave to start Zetwerk, he was pretty unhappy. Like, I'm leaving the US and coming back to India, so he was not very comfortable with that decision. And second, yeah, I'm going to quit the job and not seek a transfer to the India office, and yeah, start something completely new. And it also didn't help that I was getting married that year, so it was
Oh
just,
my God.
yeah.
Okay.
So it was just a trifecta of unknowns, I think, which took him
Wow.
some time to get around to. Um, And yeah, I mean these things I hope will change in the last 4 or 5 years. Now entrepreneurship seems more socially acceptable than definitely it was back in my time.
But it's always an emotional decision, right? And something that you need to kind of make with your entire family while you're getting married. And how did you? I mean, you didn't have the conviction either when you quit and you moved back to India. You didn't know exactly what you're going to build. How did you kind of explore
It was
it?
not yeah, I mean it's not like I didn't have conviction. I just didn't know what I was going to do.
And
So
Amrit, so just to add to that, the process of building conviction is one, but also I think it's a more Asian thing where, like Mazin said, you have to make a collective decision. How did you uh, firstly build conviction yourself, and the second is how did you convince the others, or didn't you probably didn't convince them and waited for some time for the decision to settle in, because this is that the drama that is going on in your head as well as now it is happening in your family too, and you're doing these like three big moves, which is moving back to India, which a lot of people are against, starting a company, which a lot of people are against, married everyone is for, but still it's an important it's a
yeah,
very important milestone.
yeah, yeah. No, when I came back, so I mean, I came back in January 2018. I'm from Bhubaneswar, so I first went there. I was staying
Right.
with my mom, and I was trying to do all this stuff remotely. I was trying to get back in touch with people I'd lost touch with for last 4 or 5 years. So I was just trying to get back in touch and just announce that I'm back and look, you know, what are just interesting things that are happening in India. So just trying to catch up with people, and very quickly realized that that's not going anywhere. Like it was too formal. Like, oh, I'm setting a calendar block to talk to
Hmm.
you on so and so day, and no obvious follow up of that conversation. And so I decided I'm going to come to Bangalore, and just be physically here. Even though I again didn't have full clarity on what exactly I'll do, so I just came to Bangalore. There were a lot of these short term rental startups back then, like your Oyo Life. So I actually stayed in a Oyo for almost 4 or 5 months because I again didn't have full visibility into what I'll be doing for that period of time. But in that time period, I met a lot of people. Like I just reached out, tapped into my network, saying, "Hey, can I just meet you and just understand what you've been up to and how things are evolving?" And those people introduced me to other people, and that's when the initial thought process came that okay, it's starting a company. I'm mentally ready. Like I met a lot of entrepreneurs, and I realized that yeah, I mean, though they don't seem that different from me, they're also talking the same language, and I'm able to relate to them. They're able to relate to me. I had never raised capital ever, and then I met like a pretty successful entrepreneur. He said that basis this conversation, I'm reasonably confident you can raise like a seed round if you wanted to. And all these things just incrementally helped. And around that time, I was talking to my co-founder Srinath. He was at Blackbuck at that point in time, and he was also doing pretty well in his career. Like both of us went to ITC, IIT Madras. After ITC, he had started off business, and then he was at Blackbuck. So he had already seen two startup journeys, not just at the 0 to 1 stage, but they were all in the 1 to N stage. And he was also itching to do something again of his own. So it was a yeah, like timing worked really well. Like um, for me, the initial conviction came when I was able to convince Sheena that we were going to do something together. We didn't really exactly know what it would be.
So no idea, but co-founding team is in place. Very interesting.
Yeah,
Hmm.
for me that was really important because I knew that I don't think I can do this by myself, and and Srinath and I knew each other for last 10 years. We kind of could read each other's mind a little bit at that point in time, and it was yeah, very easy conversation. And then we started looking at okay, what if we have to do something, what it would be. And then that was also pretty easy because we had to just look back at what we had done in our prior careers. So my first job was at ITC, and at ITC I was building a large factory. That was my first role. And when I look back and started speaking with the same folks at ITC who were still there, not much had changed in terms of how they ran their some of their procurement functions, and to when I was doing it back in the day to 10 years later. And Srinath, his father ran a small manufacturing unit. So he was into, his family business was into manufacturing. So the initial ideas of what Zetwerk would be came about very quickly. I don't think we discussed a lot. Like we maybe discussed one or two ideas at max, and we quickly knew that there is something here. We just then went straight deep into it. We started talking to people in the industry, other people like Srinath's father who ran small manufacturing units, just to understand pain points. And yeah, one is we intellectually liked the idea, but we emotionally connected with the idea, because I could draw a straight line from my first job to today, and Srinath could draw a straight line from his growing up background experiences to what we wanted to do. So I think that emotional connect was extremely important, and that gave us the first conviction that we want to do this.
I think very interesting point, because there are two kinds of approaches that founders take. One is, and I was going to ask you this question, that did you take a consultant's approach, although you were a consultant for a short time period, which is look at TAM and then go downwards. I think it was organic, and I'm personally in that boat. I don't think there's a right answer, which believes in the emotional connect, because I feel it helps you get through the lows a lot better than if you're just doing it in a very analytical way. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it was not analytical at all. Like today, we are very analytical.
Right.
We apply that consulting rigor.
Yeah, because you're at
Uh,
scale now. But I think in the first few years, it's extremely has to be passion driven. Is my opinion. I agree. That's quite interesting. And like, you wouldn't intuitively find somebody to be passionate about a B2B business, because
yeah,
consumer businesses, we've seen ourselves as pain points. But now I see why you felt it was a pain, because you were surrounded by these people when you were working, facing the same problems, and I think you must have connected to that problem.
we did, and our first job at ITC was also very atypical. Like, and I realized that today. My first job, literally, I was fresh out of college, and I was put in charge of building a factory,
Right.
where there was basically empty land, and over 2 years we built a massive factory. It's a huge, I think almost 2,000 people work there,
Hmm.
and I was working 24/7 for like 2 years. I was handling almost 80 to $100 million of spend. I was hiring close to 100 200 people, every 3 4 months, and I didn't realize that that's not a typical first job.
Right.
That's very unusual. First job
Right.
is, yeah, you go through a very apprentice
Yeah.
program. This was literally, in hindsight, we were thrown into the deep end.
Yeah,
But
like
that,
EIR almost, entrepreneur in residence for ITC. It's, yeah,
yeah, I mean,
fascinating.
at the end of 2 years, I had a factory to show for all my hard work.
Right.
So I
That's
could,
insane.
which is the challenge I had with McKinsey.
Yes.
Hmm.
Like there was a lot of hard work that went in, but it was unclear what was happening because of that. But in this case, yeah, I had a very tangible output, and it created an economic engine, and I really felt that that set us, both me and Srinath also had a similar kind of, he didn't build a factory, but he did more like a lot of work in agriculture, but he was working close to farmers, and we learned about business not through Excel, which I think what happens a lot today in most typical first jobs, especially if you go to good undergrad college, you either take a, let's say, banking or a consulting job, or even if you're working at a corporate, you largely work on your computers, which we did that, but that was maybe 20% of our work. and I think that really set us up to emotionally appreciate what we were doing, because
Right.
we had a good touch and feel for
Understand. And I think, before we get into what Zetwerk started doing and how you guys have evolved, the second question which I had, which was convincing others who matter,
yeah.
how was that? What's the process like? Whatever you can share, would love to learn.
No, my wife has been like number one kind of not just me convincing her, but her convincing me also.
Okay.
That
Like you can do it.
that that this is something that we can do.
Right.
And in fact, you come across all these things become clear in moments of uncertainty and doubt, and by between January to March, when we formally started Zetwerk, there are lots of these ups and downs. We decided that we want to raise capital to start the business, and raising a seed round. That time we raised $1 million, which is lesser than what typically gets raised today. But we met so many people and we got so many rejections. And initially, also, it was not clear whether the rejections were personal or professional. It felt very personal, and and um, and uh, um, and then in that moment, you need somebody to tell you that, yeah, you may have been rejected 10, 20, 30 times, but you need only one yes. That's all that matters to start this process. And more than me convincing my wife, she was constantly, Shania was constantly trying to, keep our goals on target. With my parents, it was slightly different. My father was like very unconvinced. Like, and at one point, I think I just said, I'll sort this out later. Let me actually get some momentum, and then I'm sure eventually he'll understand it. He was not against it, but he was like little, like, I don't know what the right word is. Maybe disappointed or something like that. Like
I
it was
think
not.
Asian parents are always disappointed regardless of what you do.
Yeah, he was not.
Perpetually.
No, to him it just felt like it was a bad decision, and it came from his background. Like, he tried to start a business in dot-com boom, and he lost a lot of money, and so he just felt that somehow, it's not we are not suited for business. That was his takeaway from that. Whereas my mother was completely opposite. Like, she has just blind support. Just yeah, you have done so well in life, and hence you know what you're doing, right? So, and she also quit her job at 50, 55 to start her own nonprofit, which is also entrepreneurial in her domain. So she understood that starting a company could be very rewarding. Again, may or may not be financially, but definitely from a life's purpose point of view. So she was very supportive, and anyway, my dad also helped. He gave me a deadline. Like, look, your wedding is in December. You need to you need to figure it out by then. You know. So there was a artificial deadline to.
Yeah, so there was a fundraising supposed to happen before that. Was that
No,
the
I mean, fundraise slash broad market fits. So
okay?
we
Understand.
we we got to we actually raised our Series A like a week before my wedding.
Oh,
So
so there's like VC expectations, and then there's parent expectations. PMF for dad.
yeah,
This is the first time I've heard it, but I'm sure all founders go through it for sure.
yeah.
That's amazing.
And so let's jump into what Zetwerk does for our listeners. Maybe if you can explain in simple terms.
Yeah, I mean, so what we do today, and we have kind of evolved over the years a little bit, but we work. We are a marketplace for manufacturing. The What we do is we work with mid to large companies who want to get various products made. We partner with these companies typically at the design slash concept phase, when these products are just ideas, either hand drawn or computer sketches or whatever. And we essentially convert that digital design into a physical product that we can touch and feel. But the way we do it is a asset light model, where we partner with lots of third party manufacturers and contractors. So our role as a business becomes adding that digital layer through which matchmaking can happen, pricing can happen, and ultimately fulfillment can happen. And we do it for a wide variety of products. I think we are also discovering how deep the inefficiencies in the supply chains are. So while we started with a core focus on industrial goods, so where our customers would be some of the largest, pick your name, Tatas, L&Ts, these kind of industrial conglomerates in India. Today we work with a lot of consumer brands also. So our business is constantly evolving, but the pain point we are solving for the customer stays the same. They want a reliable manufacturer. There has to be no surprises on time or quality. If you say 30 days, give the product in 30 days, and of course it should be as per spec. And as simple as it sounds, it's not an easy thing to deliver. You can maybe deliver it once or twice, but to deliver it for hundreds or thousands of transactions over years, that's the business we have built.
And that just sounds incredibly impressive. It sounds like there's a lot, but our listeners love hearing about how you started and how you got your first customer. So maybe you can tell us how you started and how that's very different from where you are today.
I mean, our first customer was so random. I'll take a step back. Like initially, we wanted to build SaaS. We wanted to build software for people like me at ITC who were managing large projects to manage their procurement better. That was the thesis. We thought through this, we will sell software to 10 companies. Each company will onboard 100 suppliers. We'll get 1,000 suppliers. We'll create a marketplace of suppliers. That was the strawman theoretical kind of approach. And I don't think it's a bad approach. Yeah. Like there's companies in the US like Ariba who have built massive businesses pretty much with this.
No, approach. It makes sense. It's a hook, and then you build up a marketplace. You build one side, you build the supply, and then you build one side.
Yeah. And then we started with this. We went to a lot of these companies and said, "Hey, do you need this? Do you have this pain point?" And almost all of them said yes. It was that gave conviction. That when we talked to customers, of course, we were still discussing theory. That will you use a software like this? Because your SAP does only issues a purchase order. There is a lot of activity that happens before you issue a purchase order to a supplier. And there's a lot of activity that happens after you issue a purchase order. You want to track whether the order has actually been fulfilled. There is no software today which addresses these two pain points. Most ERPs will just say, I'll issue an order and I'll take an invoice. This is in B2B. Now we raised our seed round. We built the software, initial like a MVP. We went back to these same customers and said, look, we've built what you asked. Now, how do we convert this into a sale? And then the reaction was the exact opposite of, there was a lot of enthusiasm when we were discussing theory, and when they actually had to do something, they're like, you discovered all kinds of reasons. You discovered like, for some of these large multinational companies, I don't make any software decisions in India. So
that was it.
That's so I can't do anything. I can connect you to my CIO who sits in US.
Yeah.
That's the best I can do. Some of the Indian companies were like, I have an in-house IT team. I'll build this myself. So you got all kinds of reasons, and then we quickly realized that enterprise sales in India is hard. Yeah. But at the same time, all these companies are asking, can I use your software to discover new suppliers and stuff like that? And so we picked up on that team and said, okay, let's try and pick one small category and see if we can introduce new suppliers to the buyer. Because suddenly the buyer could take that decision. The buyer was allowed to pick a new supplier.
That's an interesting way to think about it. So it was you're looking at their decision-making ability, and they couldn't actually buy software, but they could choose their buyer. Wow. Okay.
We were discussing what does a typical day look like, what kind of decisions they make, and which is the simplest from a go-to market. And so we said, okay, we'll build a marketplace. But it was still theory. We added some suppliers, but we didn't know how good they were, and we didn't really know how to underwrite suppliers. But we didn't really wait for that to start doing sales. We kind of did all in parallel. We were just going back to the same customers, like, hey, give us a design you want to get made, we will find suppliers for you. Like, it was as simple as that. And some people humored us and just said, okay, you take this, find me a supplier. And they usually gave us the toughest problems. You know, they
Yeah,
were not
stuff
like,
they couldn't find someone for. Like, yeah,
they're not like friendly. Yeah. Stuff they couldn't do themselves. That's what they were giving us. So, you know, we didn't have a good hit rate and we were struggling. And I remember my co-founder Vishal, he was handling sales at that point. He was lining up for, he had somehow got a meeting with a very large company. And he was just waiting at the door of that, head of procurement of, this large company to get a meeting. And you know how it works in India, like they make you wait for like hours sometimes. And it all depends on their priority. So next to Vishal, there was another guy who was waiting. So they started talking, and that guy became our first customer. So, and this guy was a smaller business. It was a 100 crore business. Both of us were waiting in the office for a 10,000 crore business. And that's when we realized, oh, it's easier to work with smaller companies on day one. And this was basically a European company which had a small India office. They had a design for a product called air compressor, which is pollution control equipment, which is it's get installed in the chimneys of all these factories. So that guy was trying to sell that product, and we said, look, you have the design, we can make that product for you. That's how the conversation started. That guy became our first customer. Then we started to understand, what does this market mean. We got more analytical. We started analyzing that pollution control equipment market. We found 10 other companies who operate in that space. So then we went to all 10 of them saying, look, we have already done this. We have already solved it for one company. And then, that worked. Like all 10 of them became customers. And then we started getting a little bit more, looking at, okay, just start building blocks from there. Okay, who is this guy supplying to? Can we talk to them? There's process after, but the first one, if I have to replicate, I don't think I can replicate it today. It was very random.
Literally being in the right place at the right time.
But yeah, I mean, it goes back to my point of, just maximizing
Yes,
luck. Like
exactly.
we went to so many meetings, we just took all the meetings we could. And I feel, this is luck, but it also, it was meant to be, like, because we put ourselves in so many of these situations to get successful.
And passion was basically the launch pad, but the analytical prowess was the fuel in some sense.
Yeah. I mean, today, I think we look at the business extremely analytically. Like, see what the challenge in our business is. It's an uncatalogued business. End of the day, like you don't really know. Like, let's say our customer is a refinery, who's oil and gas refinery. They buy thousands of custom products, but they will not have an Excel sheet of this 1,000 products that I'm buying every year, or how much I'm buying, or some of it may be in their recipe, which is proprietary, they won't share. You go to a different oil and gas refinery, they'll be buying the same product but using different language. So there's no standard nomenclature, unlike consumer e-commerce, where you're buying a book, the title of the book, you can search it and you can find 10 people who will supply it. So we are somewhat creating that catalog for all these kind of unbranded custom products, and then we, in some ways, we are trying to discover what is the TAM of each of those products and where we should spend time. And because we can grow the business in any direction, but ultimately, over a long period of time, we should probably pursue markets which are growing, and the size is big, and there is some inflection point in that industry. That's where we have seen maximum success. We become more analytical over a period of time.
And in a lot of ways, this was sort of, before you even started Zetwerk, this was sort of a bet in India, and you believed in the Indian manufacturing sector. Would like to talk about that a little bit at the macro level. China historically has been a leader in the space. what strengths do you think India has as a market, and why do you think that they've emerged now as a global supplier?
Yeah. I mean, when you, for any kind of manufacturing, the three key problems you're solving are time, quality, and cost. Like you want to be reliable on all three parameters. That yeah, if you're giving a product to an Indian manufacturer, if you say 30 days, it'll be done in 30 days. Quality will be perfect, and the price makes sense. If you analyze all these three parameters and compare us to some of these other stronger countries, there are parts of the market where India is very strong already, but as a whole, we are still behind. The key advantage, countries like China and even Vietnam, we have a lot of supply in Vietnam. The key advantage there is, if you say I want this product in 30 days, they often give it to you in 25 days. Whereas in India, it is a challenge. It can be, it is generally never get done. Very rarely it'll get done in 30 days. It can, but and the upper side is infinite. Sometimes you have no predictability on how long it takes. But that's also opportunity for companies like us. We provide that more reliable layer through aggregation and through technology, through various business model innovations. That in our case, 30 days is often 30 days, or if not 30 days, then here is a portal you can log into and check the real time status. It's like when you're ordering food. In general, you get it in 30 minutes. Sometimes it gets delayed, but when it gets delayed, you can check your app, and that gives you comfort that okay, yeah, there's a little bit of delay, but whatever, it'll come. That you extrapolate that over 3 months, 6 months time period per transaction. There's a lot of anxiety for buyers, which we're reducing, right? So as a macro, I think India will eventually catch up on all these things, but today definitely time is a problem. On cost, parity is starting to come between India and other markets. So I think a lot of growth will come because the cost parity is there. But for India to be truly successful, they have to also deliver on time and quality, which I would say we are not fully there as a country.
And I love that framework of thinking about it in terms of those three parameters. But for Zetwerk as a company, I believe you guys transformed during the pandemic, right? I mean, from a predominantly Indian supplier base to becoming a lot more global. Can you talk us through a bit through the transition and how you...
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we had multiple transitions. Like one is we were purely doing industrials. We expanded into consumer products during the
Okay.
pandemic, and today it's 20-25% of our business. We were primarily doing India, both on demand and supply. Today, almost again 20% of our revenue comes from international markets. Another 10% of our supply comes from international markets. And you see all permutation combinations. The biggest combination is US, like India is the biggest, followed by US
Okay.
India, but we also do US Vietnam, we do US China,
Oh,
we do Middle East India, Europe India, Europe Vietnam. So these yeah, it's an n by n matrix of combinations, and I can easily visualize a future where you know there'll be more such combinations which add to complexity
yeah.
for
And
the business.
I mean, on that note,
uh,
it definitely adds to complexity. How have you has it just been organic as stuff has come up, you've kind of expanded into it? Has it been deliberate?
I mean, both. Like there is a version of the company which would have been pretty happy doing just India, and we would have probably still grown,
Yeah.
if not at the same speed, but somewhere close. But around 2 years back, what happened was, and this is again, global supply chain shifts, geopolitics. U.S. companies are just aggressively looking to diversify uh, out of purely being dependent on one country. And one country could be China, could be Mexico, could be Vietnam, wherever they were sourcing most of it from. And they want to add at least one or two more countries where they buy most of their product from. And just by sheer market size, India is in the kind of mind share of most of these companies. So our initial few leads from US came completely organic. US companies started reaching out to us, pinging our website and saying, hey, can you make part A, part B, part C? And we did a few just to see what it's like. But then we quickly understood the shift that is happening. And again, like, there was always a mathematical equation with which India made sense, but it was beyond math. It was more emotional. People really wanted to diversify and 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 possibly add India to their sourcing mix. And that combination of math plus emotion was, we felt, was a once in a generational shift. It's not going to happen 5 years later, 10 years later. So if we don't act on it today, we will miss the bus. And so we started building our US business.
So yeah, a bit opportunity and then being strategic again, which seems to be a common theme. Uh, you, I actually want to double click a little bit on the one example that you gave, that even if you are late, you are able to track it, and having that data and tech giving a kind of modern consumer experience to people definitely has its benefits in this traditional space. Do you have more examples of other kind of experiences that you've been able to deliver using tech and data that you know
Yeah, I mean,
And
like that.
Amrit, I think just to add to that, any frameworks which help you make these company direction shifting decisions in the process of doing that? Because in the early days of a startup, I think it happens so many times. People call them pivots, but I think a startup is pivoting every day in some degree. It's just that sometimes the degree is much larger. So if you can walk us through that too, just building on Mazin's question.
Yeah, I mean, like, the short of it is, like, there needs to be some clear vision, and there are multiple paths to get to that vision, and then you can decide what to act on today and what features at work will solve. And when it in our case, that it comes down to that, like, we knew that there was a version of the company even on day one which would be global, which would you know expand outside the core industrial focus within what we were doing. We just didn't know when that would happen, and we were patient. We don't really want to force fit it today or tomorrow, but we knew that at some point we wanted to touch all these kind of different markets. Now now when we have that clarity that we want to do it at some point, then we look for the right time. And right time usually is there is some disturbance in the market. um, China plus one is one example. Even within India, today a lot of Indian electronics companies import product from Asian countries and now are looking to set up their own manufacturing unit. All of this happened again during COVID. Now there's regulation which kind of incentivizes that. There's things like PLI which incentivizes you to set up your own manufacturing unit. So probably there cannot be a better alignment of time, market opportunity, our ability to serve. So hence we kind of do it today. So of course, vision also keeps evolving. There's not a static vision. So and that requires constant check-ins with your co-founders, with your just being real about the business you have built, and how long and how big do you want to grow it, and that vision evolves. But having a point of view is important. Having no point of view can lead you to like some random directions. So it starts with that. Um, and and uh, and I would say we try and be clear ourselves so that we can give clarity to the org, and we can give clarity to the story that the company is creating. So no, it starts with that, uh, broadly.
I understand. And this international business strategy, um, you said it was a combination of being organic as well as prepared in some sense. When did you start like doubling down on it? And if you can talk through the future of the company, given that
Yeah.
context, which I think it'll be very important for you now.
Yeah, I mean, today international is almost 20% revenue and 10% supply. So almost 30% of our business happens in non-rupee trade. That's how we describe international trade for us.
Right.
And yeah, I mean it was zero basically 1.5-2 years ago,
Oh,
and yeah, I mean the key part was that whole COVID related disruption. Like before COVID, US China also had tariffs where when US companies imported product from China, it was suddenly 25% more expensive. And so you started seeing some of the industries moving to India. And but if you start looking at it in data, you're already too late,
right.
because data will show 1 year later only. So you sometimes we have the privilege of being very early to see some of these things happen before they happen. It's interesting. I'm starting to realize some of this. Like I was just meeting a bank yesterday, meeting one of their economists, and some of the trends they were forecasting, we are already seeing some of that today,
Right.
uh, because our customers are building lots of new factories, lots of new infrastructure. They are asking for parts. They have not yet built that factory. Once they build that factory, it will show up as a data point that yeah,
It's a factory.
it's a factory. But for us, we get to see it very very early, sometimes 2 years earlier than when it has actually happened, right? And then, but there's a lot of noise also. So I mean that's the kind of tricky part of what is signal, what is noise. um, Ultimately the company success is a reflection of how good we navigate that signal and noise,
Right.
and make fewer mistakes.
And I think you make an interesting point. I think in the digital world, perhaps an underlying trend starts reflecting very fast because it's being measured. But in the physical world, they're like blocks in some sense. So what's being
Yeah,
built in the underlying world reflects a lot later. I think a good parallel, very different, is Chat GPT and OpenAI, because they suddenly arrived with an explosion, but people in the inside obviously knew that
yeah,
this was being built. And I think because you're seeing the inputs coming into play, you'll also know that the output is there. And related to that, you while you are a technology company, um your underlying core business is physical. It had a once in a century kind of impact. And perhaps if you add the war, there are probably two in some generational kind of changes. How did you navigate that? Was there any impact on the company, cultural changes, given the physical nature of your core business?
yeah. I mean, it was definitely a tough year. Like when COVID first happened, I think it was tough for it. I mean, the good part about COVID, if I can say use that language, is that it was tough for everyone. We were not kind of unique in that sense. Of course, if you're a purely digital business, then the impact on you was less. But for any commerce company, it was kind of universally impacted in some sense. And so while there was a lot of chaos in the first few months, the bigger part was how long is this going to be? And I think if you ask 10 people, you got 10 different answers. In the most optimistic would be, yeah, this is going to go away next week or next month. And then you had people who are like, this is going to be for next 2 years. And ultimately, those people were right. It was for another 2 years. Uh, but but uh, but in increase, I mean, slowly over a period of time, things start getting better. Um, you're right. The hard part about our business is we have physical operations, which means that there is a part of our company who could never be remote. I mean, there were people on the ground, who were doing operations and things like that. And hence, us as a business, we took a call that while as corporate, we could be remote. We could be, it was, and we were remote for almost 6-9 months. But the moment we were able to come back, we want to come back to office IRL, just because it's the right thing to do. It didn't make sense for us as a company to have two different cultures. Corporate team being remote and the operations team, being IRL. We didn't like that dichotomy because we also don't operate like that as a business. We don't create silos as functions that, okay, some functions are special and some functions are, you don't want to give that messaging. So we have been kind of working from office. We were actually very early to go remote. We went remote in February 2020, before the world had shut down.
Was this
Because I was
also because you saw the signals in data in some sense, or
no, I mean, it was easier answer. I was actually in the US in Feb
okay,
2020, and I could just see the train wreck
okay,
happening.
okay,
So went to office we went remote very quickly, but we also turned that switch back quicker than, I would say, a
others?
lot of other
Hmm.
companies. And that was more value driven than anything else. That we didn't want to have two different cultures within the company that coexist.
Understand. And what's most exciting for you in the near term from a company standpoint? Is it the international business that you're most excited about?
Yeah, I mean, for us, there is lots to be excited about. Like, we see three key themes play out in the next 12 months. One is this whole international, which is China plus one. I think we are still in the infancy of that. The same way in Indian outsourcing business, from a software outsourcing point of view, is still a growing business, even though it's such a large industry already. I think if you extrapolate that to physical products, we are very very early, and I think I see a 10 to 20-year-old trend where lot of manufacturing will move to India. The spin of that, which is related trend, is Indian companies also localizing. This whole Make in India movement.
Right,
In India also imports a lot of product, and that is also in a way a national waste. And we are seeing a lot of companies starting their journey of localizing products in India. Again, it is year one of probably a 10-20 year long trend. And the third thing is just the core India story. India is growing.
right,
I think we are all believers of that in this call for sure, and hopefully people who are listening. And there is a credible path for the economy to touch 5 trillion, 10 trillion, pick a number,
right,
over our lifetime, right? And 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 in a sense, the work we do, it's very behind the scenes, but India's growth cannot happen without our growth,
right.
um, because we supply a lot of the piping for the infrastructure
Yeah.
in some
And your
sense.
growth will happen with India's growth as well. It works both ways, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah. So we are all symbiotically intertwined, and yeah, we are big believers, and yeah, certainly from our vantage point, things look extremely optimistic. Things are getting better every year, and certainly, while we are into this whole manufacturing industry, there is a lot we are not able to do. So we would love more entrepreneurs to enter this industry,
Right,
and we have also created a program internally to support early stage companies. We don't really make any money of it. It is mostly to give back to the ecosystem. So I believe that we'll see a lot of pretty meaningful. I don't know about how large they'll be, but meaningful companies that will come out of the whole Indian manufacturing story over the next decade.
understand. And why we call this podcast Founders Unfiltered is one piece of unfiltered advice you've got that you'd love to share with our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, I've got so many. Like I've had I think, very good fortune of having great mentors throughout my journey. My first boss at ITC was Sanjeev Rangras, who was the CEO of the agribusiness division. He later joined the board of ITC, and now he's on the board of Zetwerk. So we've come a full circle.
Hmm.
And yeah, I remember, like, one day I was in his office, and I mean, it was very, like, crystal clear advice, and it comes from clarity that I was kind of in a funk. I was not. I mean, I was doing well, but I was kind of stagnant for, let's say, a few months. He noticed that, and he said that, look, there is a version of you which will stay as you are. and that is again go with the flow. But there is a version of you, if you want to change, that change will happen,
Right.
and you can see that change over the next 1, 2, 3 years. But you have to be very clear about your self-awareness and what exactly you're trying to change, and then you be honest to that change over a period of time. He basically said that, yeah, I need to do better
Right.
and in better language, and but the way he described it was a choice that
Hmm.
that
Rather
either I
than
can choose to,
like this is what you should do. He gave
yeah,
you the framework to decide, and it's quite fascinating actually. Your choice to remain where you are, or
yeah, and where you are is not a bad
yeah,
place. Like you're doing well optically and all of that,
right,
but if you, I deep down you know that you can
do better.
you do better,
Hmm.
and that is a very difficult conversation to have with yourself.
Right,
You always try to blame somebody
right.
else for something that is not going well in your life. But if you take full accountability, you realize that everything is under your control in some sense.
Fascinating. And I think maybe which cannot be translated, but his tone and the place of care. I
Yeah,
think I even shared this today that a lot of people have this instinct to prescribe rather than describe or give a framework. People are not looking for advice, they're just looking for a framework to make a decision. And I think people who really care, they never tell you to do anything specifically. They'll give the lay of the land and they'll say, these are the options you have, you choose. And I'm sure like the way he delivered it obviously came from a place of care. And I think mentors are those people who tell you the right things, but you also know that their intent is in the right place. And I think that's the combination.
yeah. I have another one which I just remembered as we were speaking. Like when I was at business school and I was struggling between, not struggling, but like I was debating, should I join McKinsey or should I try and build a startup with my
Right,
friend? Again, I reached out to one of my professors at business school to basically ask him this advice that, hey, should I join McKinsey or should I start up? That was the framing.
right.
And his answer was brilliant. Like, if you're asking me this question, you should join McKinsey, because like because starting a company is not like, it's not it's more emotional
Right.
than just evaluating pros and cons of
Hmm.
two options that you have. The answer needs to be fairly obvious, and when I was in that place 2 years later, I really appreciated that feedback at that point.
Hmm.
Till then it was still theoretical, like, okay, I mean, I didn't really get it. But
Very
when I
interesting.
actually did it, I'm like, yeah, I mean, if today somebody asks me that question, I'll probably share the same language, right? Like, I think starting a business is, it's tough, and there is a lot in hindsight you wish you knew
Right,
before you started it,
right,
and sometimes at night it helps that,
right,
yeah, you didn't really know how difficult it is, but ultimately it's a more emotional
right.
decision.
He kind of politely called you out for posturing to get McKinsey as an answer. I guess that's
Yeah,
what he was saying. That's amazing, and I agree. I mean, like nobody asks the question when they really made up their mind between starting
yeah,
up and I think anything else in the world. Um,
yeah.
oh, awesome. Thank you for sharing. Thank you once again, Amrit, for joining in. It was a amazing conversation.
Thanks for having me, guys.